What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at Week 3 in the UFL. You're going to want to use these players in your lineups. These are the top DFS plays for your DraftKings UFL lineups in Week 3 of the UFL season in both Classic and Showdown lineups. I'm going to fly through some of the most important information and the top plays you can consider on this weekend's slate. The best quarterback that you can play this weekend, guys, is going to be either A.J. McCarron, who I have on the screen, or Chase Garbers of the San Antonio Brahmas. These are the only two quarterbacks that are averaging over 18 fantasy points per game through 2 weeks of play, and by far having much better play through the air than any other quarterback in the league at this point. If we just look at some of the raw numbers through 2 weeks of play, McCarron leads the UFL in passing with 464 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 two-point conversions. However, he has taken 8 sacks on the season, which is definitely important to keep in mind here in a hotly contested game to close out the weekend with the Brahmas. The Battlehawks may be having some offensive line issues on the young season. So that is definitely something to be aware of. We have Chase Garbers from the San Antonio Brahmas, who led a phenomenal comeback victory against the Memphis Showboats late in the fourth quarter last weekend. Hopefully he can put together a full 4 quarters of elite play here. 287 passing yards in a single game last week. I believe that's the high on the season in the UFL through 8 games. Definitely going to be an opportunity to eclipse that for Garbers here in week number 3. Brahmas and Battlehawks is the premier game of the weekend for DFS purposes on the 4-game slate. It's also the last game of the weekend. Flat out, if you are going into this weekend slate without having at least a little bit of exposure to this game, you're probably going to be dead this weekend, guys. This is probably going to be the best game on the board. It has the second highest total at 42 points, so that's why I'm interested in getting a lot of the weapons from this game into our lineups. It's going to be difficult to get all of these top-priced weapons. McCarron, his target share leading wide receiver, Darius Shepard, and San Antonio's target share leading wide receiver, Jontre Kirkland, in the same lineup with CJ Marable of the Birmingham Stallions. But there are some other plays that you can play around these guys to make them fit in different lineup combinations, and that's what we're going to talk about here. The Birmingham Stallions are favored by 7 points here in week number 3. CJ Marable being the starting running back, seeing the most opportunities in this offense. He therefore becomes one of the best plays on the board as a result against the Showboats. Marable has 14-plus rush attempts in each of the games this season, and we saw the target share go up a little bit in week number 2. Ricky Person Jr. is definitely a name to be aware of at running back at a cheap price, just $6,100 here. Clearly the second running back in the pecking order for the Stallions, but is still going to have a decent floor here of 8 to 12 touches. You see he's got 10 carries, 7 carries first couple weeks of the season, 2 targets, 3 targets. Person has also had 2 red zone rushing touchdowns. They'd like to mix it up and use him near the goal line, so there is definitely a decent floor here for a player at a really modest $6,100 price tag on an offense favored by 7 points. That makes him also kind of interesting here in the large field Saturday special on DraftKings. So every other game is expected to be hotly contested, relatively close. We have the Michigan Panthers favored by 2 points in their matchup with the Houston Roughnecks. The Battlehawks are favored by 1 on the road against the Brahmas here on DraftKings Sportsbook. And the Arlington Renegades are favored by 1 at home against the DC Defenders. And speaking of the Arlington Renegades, my favorite play in this game overall is going to be Arlington Renegade Tyler Vaughns at wide receiver. He's one of our underperforming wide receivers this week with a 24% target share, 35% air yard share in the Renegades offense from Luis Perez. Vaughns is underperforming his expected total of fantasy points by 12 points thus far on the season, so he's due to score some touchdowns the way he's being utilized. Really healthy 14-yard average depth of target on the outside here for the Renegades as well, primarily running his routes from outside positions here thus far on the season. Tyler Vaughns will be an interesting play. Other underperforming wide receivers that can be considered on this slate. Anthony Ratliff Williams is also a primary boundary wide receiver in the UFL for the Houston Roughnecks. Ratliff Williams has a league-high 44% share of team air yards on the Roughnecks. Just 4 receptions for 23 yards on his 9 targets thus far to show for it. Primary slot receiver Justin Hall is dealing with a concussion on the injury report this week for the Roughnecks. Isaiah Henney may not be ready to return to the lineup. We're going to have to keep an eye on that. It really looks like we may have a really thin pass catcher room for the Roughnecks, with Ratliff Williams being potentially the best option on the board at just $4,100. Also, our number one underperforming wide receiver. So a very, very good high-risk option, I would say, on this slate. And then going back to the first game of the weekend, on the other side of the matchup with the Renegades, going back to the well with Brandon Smith at $5,400. Very disappointing, 0 fantasy points in week number 2. However, he still led the defenders in routes run and has a very, very healthy 18.7 yard average depth of target on his 9 targets thus far on the season. He is another player that we're going to keep an eye on in high-risk contests at a modest price tag that is worth considering. Marable, by far my favorite running back play on the board. We have Wes Hills is probably the next best option, favored at home against the Houston Roughnecks for the Michigan Panthers, has seen about 50% of team carries through each of the first 2 weeks of the season, and he had a tremendously high upside in 2023 in the USFL with the New Orleans Breakers that we haven't necessarily seen him meet here yet with the Panthers this season. Rushing overall has been pretty bad in the UFL from running backs. Running backs averaging just 3.2 yards per attempt and have only scored a touchdown on 2.4% of their carries. This is one of the worst league-wide spring football splits we've seen over the last few years, but it's certainly not because of Wes Hills. Wes Hills is averaging 5.3 yards per carry this season, and that's one of the better numbers for high-volume running backs here in the UFL. So expect him to break out and get some touchdowns at some point, and there's no time like the present for Hills here, as he's got a matchup against what is probably one of the worst teams in the league in the Houston Roughnecks. Behind Hills, we have a ton of split backfields that we have to deal with. The Arlington Renegades are splitting opportunities relatively evenly between Devion Smith and Letty Brown, so I'm not tremendously interested in either one of these guys here. I'm more interested in the passing game for the Renegades. St. Louis, we did see Mateo Durant basically take over the backfield last week. If you watched last week's video, you know that Wayne Gallman was my favorite play on the board. Unfortunately, what I did not account for was the fact that his job was not safe in this offense. So the spot was right for that matchup against the Arlington Renegades for a running back. Unfortunately, it was Mateo Durant who dominated and not Wayne Gallman. But I would expect Durant to have earned a larger role here at this point for the Battlehawks, and I would prioritize him over Gallman here. But I do think most people are going to be playing the passing attack with the Battlehawks this week against the Brahmas and not the running backs. But it does seem like Durant is the better play over Gallman now with 14 carries, 104 yards last week, and Gallman 2 rush attempts for 4 yards. So RIP, pour one out. Did not work out with Wayne Gallman last week, but we move on. John Lovett and Anthony McFarland virtually splitting for the Brahmas as well. So it kind of hard to stomach McFarland's $8,900 price tag, given the fact that Lovett is seeing as many touches as he has in this offense, as many snaps as he's seeing in this offense. So I'm kind of off of them here. Obviously, with the strong performance Mateo Durant had against the Arlington Renegades, we should be interested in the DC Defenders. Cameron Harris is on the injury report this week, so we're going to have to monitor that through the weekend going into Saturday afternoon. If Cameron Harris is limited or unable to go, look for Darius Hagans to build upon last week's performance where he got in the end zone and have a decent chance to make some noise here at a low price tag. But we're going to have to, like I said, keep an eye on the injury report for the Defenders. I'll have some updates in the Discord for sure based on how that shakes out. Number one broken play on the board potentially here. Darius Victor has not practiced this week. He may not be able to go against the Stallions on the road here for the Showboats. Normally, I would not advocate for a starting running back on a 7-point underdog on a short slate here in a spring football league. However, if Victor is unable to go, it looks like Titus Swen is going to be the starting running back at the minimum price of $4,000 for a running back here this week, guys. So Titus Swen is a name to keep in mind. If we get a report that Darius Victor is unable to play, he becomes an interesting minimum price option that might actually allow us to get closer to playing what we want here. We could definitely get a defense. We could get one of those underperforming wide receivers I was talking about in here, and you could almost run a lineup exactly like this using some of the highest upside assets on the board. So that is primarily why we're going to be interested in Titus Swen if we get the ruling of Darius Victor out for week 3. Quarterback, top plays, for those of you who just want to know what to do this weekend, I would stick with McCarron and Garbers as the best options on the board this week. At the running back position, I think there's nothing wrong with just slotting in C.J. Marable and moving on with your life, but I also think Wes Hills is playable on this slate. Mateo Durant, if he continues to get a decent amount of work for the Battlehawks at a modest price. And then we have Titus Swen potentially starting for the Showboats at the minimum price. At defense, I love targeting the Roughnecks because this offense has not been much to sneeze at through 2 weeks of the season. So the Michigan Panthers are going to be my favorite defense here on the board. The Roughnecks are also likely to be without their starting quarterback this week, guys. Jarrett Guarantano is injured and unlikely to play in week number 3. So that means that we are going to probably see Reed Sinnett play a full game here for them in week number 3. So the Panthers are in an interesting position here. You can make the same argument on the other side of the board in this game, though, for the Roughnecks. E.J. Perry has not practiced for the Panthers either, so Danny Etling might play for the Michigan Panthers this week. So this will be important to monitor going into Sunday afternoon. I think one of these defenses in the Michigan Panthers Houston Roughnecks game is the way to go, though, because it's also the lowest total game on the board. At wide receiver, everybody that's following the UFL knows who the best weapons are at this point. Jontre Kirkland has the highest target share on the highest upside offense. We also have Marquez Stevenson as an option on the Brahmas. Darius Shepard has the highest target share on the Battlehawks. We like him very, very much this week. Marcel Aitman seeing the second most opportunities from McCarron in that offense, so obviously you have to consider him. Hakeem Butler still has a really high price tag. He hasn't had the box score results yet, but he does still have a very involved role as well, so I would consider him as someone that may not be as heavily owned as some of the other guys I discussed earlier in the video. On the San Antonio side, Latimer's work finally went back to what we expected it would be in week number 2, 9 targets. So Latimer's also an option here at a modest price tag that I wouldn't be shy from deploying in week number 3. And of course, we have all of the high upside, underperforming wide receivers that I discussed towards the middle of this video for you. The best option, I think, being Anthony Ratliff-Williams, leading the league with a 44% air yard share on his targets here in the Roughnecks offense. Could be playing a larger role if Justin Hall is out. We have Tyler Bonds from the Renegades also on that list this week. And we have Brandon Smith with the DC Defenders. That is going to be where we're at here in week number 3, guys, of the UFL season. Thank you once again for watching this video, guys. Good luck in week number 3 of the UFL season, and I'll be back next weekend to talk to you about week number 4.